really believe that that we can change the world for the better. I believe that we have changed the world for the better, and we need to attract the right sort of people into politics. We need to support them more instead of constantly criticizing and expect. You know, you were talking about one of the things that Twitter does do is 100 and whatever it is words. I don't know because I've never actually used it, but whatever it is, you can't have a solution. Things are complicated, and one of the things I'd say I'm not so keen on having just 2 terms for politicians is that assumes that politics is something that, you know, anyone can do. It's harder than that. It is actually a hard slog. It's a genuinely difficult vocation, and you need to get familiar with it. You need to practice it, and if you're doing it well, you need to be re-elected, and if you're not doing it well, then it's not just 2 terms, it's 1 term and you're out. And, you know, if you don't like what your politicians are doing, you can elect them out. You don't have to artificially say, well, after 2 terms. I mean, Tony always said he'd after 2 terms as Prime Minister, he'd only really started to understand how he could make the system work, you know, because it takes time. And, you know, politics, it's not sort of amateur hour. And if we try and encourage this idea that it's some sort of easy thing where people can just line their own pockets and go off, it's not like that. It's actually a hard, dedicated public service. And I wanted to say to the gentleman who was talking about bringing up his own daughters, you're right sometimes. Women can be, and we've heard this theme again, because of society and because of what society is telling us about what our roles are, sometimes women can be you know, the men at the school gate are often looked at as though they may be child abusers rather than actually dads just doing their share of the job. We need to stop making these assumptions about people, and we need to embrace diversity and embrace the fact that people can make different choices and not be frightened by the choices that other people make, but be glad that it enables us to learn so many new things and be much more creative.
Cherie, Kate, can I thank you very much for your time, because you're both very busy. Thank you for taking the time out. It's been a very enjoyable hour. Ladies and gentlemen, Cherie Blair and Kate Forbes. And just before lunch, we have another set-piece speech from another one of our political leaders just before he comes on stage, just to say a little bit about John Swinney. In the 26 years in which he has been an MSP, he has served his party's leader on 2 occasions, or he's been the leader on 2 occasions, the first being for 4 years from 2020 to 2004. When the SNP won the prize of government in 2007, ministerial office came calling, and since then he's more or less been on the front line, more or less all the time. He was Deputy First Minister for 9 years, Cabinet Secretary for Finance and the Economy also for 9 years, Cabinet Secretary for COVID Recovery, and Education and Skills Secretary for 5 years. There's not a portfolio that he does not know intimately, which means that he is well appraised to consider the scope of the challenges the country faces in the next 25 years. We look forward today to his thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney.
Well, good afternoon, and Bernard, thank you very much for the welcome, and thank you all for the opportunity to reflect on the future of Scotland and to take part in a conversation amongst us all who are invested in the future of our country. And I express at the outset of my contribution my willingness and my enthusiasm to work with people in Scotland to build the best future for our country. We all have a perspective on Scotland's future, and it will be formed by different experiences. I'm speaking here as a father, as a grandfather, and also as First Minister. My perspective is influenced by all of those experiences. This, for me, is about the world we build for Scotland's next generation and how we make our nation and our world as best as it possibly can be. But first, before turning to the world and the Scotland that we seek, I want to share some details of a new analysis that the Government has published, Future Trends for Scotland. Drawing on a wide range of practitioner and other expert views, and shaped also by insights from young Scots, it sets out the trends that it appears from that research that we think are most likely to shape Scotland in the next 10 to 20 years. And I hope it can shape your thinking, as it certainly will shape the thinking of the Scottish Government. With the Future Trends Horizon Scan, we have the best available Scotland-specific analysis to inform our decisions both now and for the future. You'll recognise some of the trends that the work has identified. A growing risk to our democracy because of mis- and disinformation, with trust in institutions falling. Conflicts more frequent, climate change impacting soil quality, biodiversity and food supply, global progress on inequality stalling. And as a result of these and other global trends, increasing voluntary and involuntary migration. No guarantee that living standards will increase, but a real risk of ongoing wealth and income inequality and significant budgetary pressures as we struggle to meet the demands of an ageing population. But also, growing success for Scotland in fields such as space and life sciences, new opportunities in energy, and widespread adoption of AI alongside the work on quantum technology. A combination of hurdles, yes, and new horizons for our society and our economy. Warnings where we need to change or up the pace, but also doors opening if we have the courage to walk through them with confidence, with boldness, and with self-belief. And it's by shaping strategy and policy towards achieving long-term outcomes that we will be ready for these challenges and for the new world as it evolves. That's one of the reasons why the Government is looking afresh at the National Performance Framework, so it can provide us with a clear North Star, a means of aligning our policy interventions to make the most of the opportunities that Scotland faces, but also to deal with the challenges that will come our way in the ensuing period. So a reformed National Performance Framework will help reshape government in Scotland. It will enable us to better focus budgets, to reduce the compartmentalisation that is a scourge of modern government, encourage collaboration between spheres of government and with partners in the third sector and the business community, which lies at the heart of the approach to government that I embody. It's one part, but an important part, of focusing government on delivering on the priorities of the people of Scotland as we build towards our vision of a Scotland that is more vibrant, more successful, more ambitious, even than the Scotland of today. But before looking forward, I wish to look back for a moment. As others have observed, the Scotland of 2050 is as far removed from us today as the Scotland into which our Parliament was born in 1999. Over the past quarter century, much has changed, but the Scotland of today is not some alien land compared to the Scotland of then. We can see clearly the threads connecting our reality now with choices made in the years in between. Yes, day-to-day life in Scotland has been fundamentally altered by technology, from the iPhone and the internet to emergent AI, and by geopolitics, from the rise of China to the impact of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, by climate change, globalisation, and by deindustrialisation. Changed also as a direct result of our disastrous withdrawal from the European Union and by the wholly negative impacts of austerity in the United Kingdom on the vitality of our public services or on people's living standards and quality of life. But it's also been shaped and changed for the better by the interventions of the Scottish Parliament, by Parliament's ban on smoking in public places, by minimum unit pricing of alcohol, or by the decisions to rapidly expand early learning and childcare, or the introduction of the HPV vaccination and the modernisation of our school estate, just to select a number of significant examples of improvement. So yes, the Scotland of 2050 will be shaped by a series of unpredictable forces, by new technologies we've only half imagined in the pages of science fiction, by conflicts now only simmering, by people who are only just born. But it will also be shaped by us, by the decisions we take, the policy choices we implement, the vision and the path forward that we set out. That's a great responsibility, but for me it is also exciting, inspiring and a privilege to shape it as First Minister. So how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? A big part of the answer is ensuring that we are in charge of our own destiny, that we have our hands on all the levers we need to make the biggest difference. A fiscal squeeze better dealt with if we are fully in charge of our nation's finances. The complexities of navigating climate change much easier if we are in charge of energy policy and our vast energy resources. Making sure we have a big enough working population to meet the demands of an ageing population, more options, more solutions possible if we are in charge of our immigration policy or members once again of the European Union. As we look around our land in 2050, my hope is that we see a modern, dynamic Scotland, a compassionate, enterprising, forward-looking nation-state, back where it belongs, at the very heart of Europe. That we've taken the climate challenge seriously and seen it as an opportunity for a complete redesign of our ways of living. For example, district heating schemes in every community, an everyday part of life, delivering low-cost heating and significantly lower energy bills. More livable communities full of climate-positive, modern, affordable homes with rethought and rediscovered high streets. More of our food grown locally and technology enabling more of what we use every day to be produced locally. We are a clean energy nation with the vast amounts of low-cost renewable energy that we produce, fueling a host of new business opportunities, data centres, research centres, energy-intensive manufacturing industries, low energy costs making it cheaper to produce food, low energy costs making it cheaper to heat our homes. Scotland, a clean energy powerhouse, an energy-rich Scotland finally meaning also energy-rich Scots. We are a high-tech, clean-tech country with our public realm digitally transformed, high-tech solutions delivering more effective, more personalised health interventions, the right systems in place to manage the acute and support us more effectively as we enter older age. We've seen too high levels of child poverty, not in terms of handouts, but as a handbrake on our potential, as a limit on the success of our nation and what we can achieve together, and that we have acted decisively to eradicate child poverty in our land. As a result, we have released the potential of tens of thousands of ambitious, eager and talented young Scots, young men and women who are playing a crucial role, a fundamental role in building our nation anew. That we have looked at our place in this world and decided that the greatest opportunity for us and an approach that provides the greatest security is the European Union. Now, how do we get there? In part, through the necessary reality of good government. That's been my focus since I became First Minister. Interventions in that vein, like a realistic medium-term finance strategy, an effective population health strategy, and a clear-eyed and mobilising programme of public service reform, all initiatives being launched in this current week. By having government focused on a clear set of priorities and producing policy that is determined by the real world, real life needs of people rather than what might best suit our political system. Eradicating child poverty, boosting economic growth, delivering climate action, improving public services, especially the National Health Service. This prioritisation of government action on those things that matter most to people, those things that will deliver the most for people, is at the very heart of what I'm trying to achieve as First Minister. Listening to the public and addressing the strain they feel over the cost of living is an essential part of that agenda. It's also about collectively owning the vision and uniting in our determination to get there. It's about focusing our efforts behind a sharp and clear set of national outcomes and ambitious short, medium and longer term national goals. However, for me, most importantly, It's about deciding to take Scotland's future into our own hands. It's only, in my view, by taking charge of our own destiny with our own hand on the tiller that we are better able to ride the waves of change, that we are better able to shape our own future. That does not mean a Scotland standing alone, but rather a nation that has worked out its place in the world and the contribution it wants to make to the world. An ongoing, deep and rich partnership with the other nations of these islands, absolutely. But ultimately as a nation-state in our own right, as a member state of the world's largest trading bloc, the world's biggest single social and economic community, the European Union. I've long believed that Scotland is an afterthought to successive United Kingdom governments. Scotland is not on Westminster's radar in the same way as, say, London or the Midlands or the South West. From a UK perspective, that is completely understandable, but from a Scottish perspective, to accept it is total folly. It holds us back in ways big and small, leaving us waiting and praying, hoping that decisions taken at Westminster are not too damaging. We are prey to a broken system and a failing economic model, a system that delivers for the very few at the very top, while living standards stagnate and real wages are squeezed for the vast majority. It means, as a nation, that we must try to thrive on what amounts, at worst, to poison pills and, at best, policy scraps from the UK table. All this when we have the capacity to stand and to flourish on our own 2 feet. I know there are many in this room who are not yet persuaded by the case for independence, and others who will never be. I respect that. But independence is the defining choice for this generation. Have no doubt about that. Because the UK status quo has proved itself incapable of delivering on the hopes and the ambitions of the people of Scotland. That is why, like a clear majority of Scots, I believe our nation should have the right to choose our future. If this is a voluntary union, as Westminster politicians insist, then it is completely untenable that there is no mechanism for Scotland to leave the United Kingdom if it so wishes. Whether it is Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage, no Westminster politician should have the ability to deny Scotland her right to national self-determination. I want to close today with a piece of poetry that I think perfectly captures this moment in time for our nation. It was written by Liz Lochhead, Scotland's marker from 2011 to 2016. It's just been given pride of place, alongside many other inspirational lines of poetry and prose on the Canongate wall of the Scottish Parliament. Liz Lochhead wrote, "This, our one small country, our one wondrous, spinning, dear green place, what shall we build of it together, in this, our one small time and space?" Today, you've heard something of my answer, something of my ambition for Scotland. It is a vision of a country that is fairer, wealthier, more at peace with itself than the Scotland of today. A Scotland that is modern, dynamic and forward-looking, living in anticipation of what more can be done, what else can be achieved, moving forward as one, moving forward with hope and with self-belief. Such a Scotland is within reach, I have no doubt. But if we want it, we have to work for it, we have to vote for it, we have to actively, purposefully, and I hope joyfully, make it happen. Thank you very much.
We literally have 5 minutes before lunch, so we've got time for 2 questions. I've interviewed Mr. Swinney on many occasions, so I don't want to ask a question. So I want to take 2 questions from the audience, but they have to be questions and not contributions. I'm going to take the woman, the third back row there, who's got her hand up. The microphone will make its way around to you. And then we'll take the chap down here in the second row. So we'll start with the women second back, then the chap down here in the second row. And again, just make it a question, not a contribution, because I think we're 5 minutes away from lunch. Yes, thank you.
Your speech sounds wonderful, but in reality, We're faced in communities with food banks. We're faced with failing high streets. We're faced with failing industry. Industry's moving away because they can't get people to work there, because we have no transport for the people to get jobs outside of our area. Now, you're talking about what a wonderful Scotland we've got, and you know, 2050. I'm a pensioner. I know, but 2050, 25 years will go away in jig time. It means nothing. If you're 25 in this room, you think, oh, that's ages away. 25 years to do all the things that you have said is not achievable, and I think we have to be realistic. So
Okay.
your thoughts on that, please?
Okay. I'm going to take the second question so that we can take them together, because time is limited. So that question there is that the lady doubts that this is achievable, the time scale, and yet the chat there. Thank you.
Thank you. First Minister, the quick question on the back of that, I suppose, in terms of what improvements then can be made within the Scottish Government to really slick in and accelerate growth within Scotland?
Well, let me take the two questions together, and thank you for both of those questions, because some of them relate to the challenges very directly that we all relate to the challenges that we face today. Some things we can address and focus on within the powers of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government, and within the resources that we have available. So if I look at some of the steps that we've taken about, for example, the expansion of early learning and childcare, that was a strategic intervention by my government to make sure that children in Scotland could get off to the best start in life. So we start at the earliest possible moment by giving young people the best platform in their lives. And that can help to shape and to strengthen the future prospects of our generation by enabling children in our society to have the best start. And that's just one example of how we can use our powers to make Scotland a better place today. And I think that's happened. I cited a number of other examples about where we've taken strategic moves in relation to health improvements, the HPV vaccination, which is a huge beneficial preventative intervention in Scottish society, in improving health outcomes. We've also taken steps on the ban on smoking in public places, not taken forward by my government, taken forward by a Labour and Liberal executive, supported by us in opposition, which has improved the health of Scotland. So I think if we look in the last 25 years, a lot can be achieved. So I'm optimistic about what can be done in the next 25 years. But I live with the ever-present reality that I am swimming against the tide of a more dominant policy stream from the United Kingdom government. So if I give you the example of child poverty, which is my absolute driving priority as First Minister, we have managed to get child poverty rates falling in Scotland while they are rising in the rest of the United Kingdom, despite 14 years of Westminster austerity. Now, I think everyone in this room would be agreed with me that eliminating child poverty would be a good thing for us to achieve as a society. But we're having to work extraordinarily hard to maintain that position, because we now have a UK government which is going to announce its welfare provisions tomorrow, which on their original announcement will lead to an increase in child poverty, not a decrease. So there is a prevailing sense of policy from the UK government which is going to make our challenge in Scotland of achieving an objective that I think we would all share much more difficult to realise. So there, for me, is a crystallisation of why Scotland should be in control of our own destiny, because we would be able to shape our own decisions and our own choices without having our agenda undermined by the United Kingdom government. Brexit, a decision rejected in Scotland, total and unmitigated economic disaster for the United Kingdom. The reason why people are living just now is because their standards of living are not rising. Why? Because of Brexit. Brexit made every single one of us poor. It was folly. But I'm the only one that's wanting to, well, the Scottish National Party leadership is the only one that wants to break us out of that and get into a sensible relationship as an independent member of the UK. So that's a long way of me.
Maybe just to deal with the point of growth, because in your speech you were quite right to, in a sense, point out public policy choices which are public policy choices which we have in Scotland, which are not replicated south of the border, and it demonstrates the ability of the Parliament to chart a different way for the country. But you're grappling day in, day out with public services which are groaning under the demands for the service, which the demographics tell us is going to increase in the next 25 years. And the job that you have may well be made completely impossible unless you can grow the economy, which will underpin the resources which those public services will need. So how do you grow the economy?
There's two aspects to that question, Ben, which I think are important. One is about growth, and one is about changing the way in which demand emerges for our public services. So yesterday I delivered a speech which was all about an ever more substantial shift to preventative interventions to avoid rising demand. So that's one part of the answer. The second part of the argument is about making sure that we use our public investment effectively to support strategic investment in the Scottish economy. Part of that, one of the things that I think is emerging as a very successful intervention is the Scottish National Investment Plan. So what that's doing is it's using public sector investment capital to de-risk projects that were probably going to challenge to be approved as entire private sector projects, to enable those projects to happen by de-risking. So that's a sensible use of public sector capital to reduce risk in projects, attract investment into Scotland, and as a consequence to assist in growing the economy. So we've got to think more actively about measures of that nature to get us into a position whereby we can encourage and motivate growth. Because as you know, if you look at the central priorities of my government, eradicate child poverty, get to net zero, improve the public services, especially the National Health Service, but boost economic growth. I unreservedly say that if we want to live in the type of Scotland that I'm setting out in my speech, we've got to deliver dynamic growth in the Scottish economy. And measures such as the Investment Bank or our partnership through our enterprise agencies to boost growth or to take strategic investment projects in the infrastructure of the economy are all part of that.
Well, we've run over by 10 minutes, but I think it was worthwhile just to get those couple of questions in. You've heard the First Minister's pitch. We're going to be back for the afternoon session at 2:10 when the man who wants to be First Minister, Anas Sarwar, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, will address you and take your questions. But can I thank Mr Swinney for taking time out of his ministerial diary to address us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our afternoon session. We have one more keynote speech and a couple of panel sessions this afternoon. We have just before lunch from the First Minister John Swinney setting out his vision in terms of where he wants the country to go in the next 25 years. It's time now to hear from the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Anas Sarwar has been leader of his party since 2021. He was elected to Holyrood in 2016, serving as an MSP for the Glasgow region. Prior to that, he served as a member of the Westminster Parliament from 2010 to 2015. Anas is from Glasgow, where he was educated, and he worked for a time as a dentist in Paisley. Now, the highly fluid nature of politics makes the next Holyrood election extremely difficult to call, not least because, as the recent by-election in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse underlined, there is all to play for in the electoral stakes. So we're now going to listen to the man who would be First Minister, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Anas Sarwar.
Thank you so much, Bernard. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I should also put on record my thanks to Barry Cunningham, who's organised today's event. And I was actually thinking about the remarks I was going to make today, Bernard, and I thought about Scotland 2050, and I did the very basic math in my head. And so my eldest son Adam is going to be 17 this August, and actually just by chance, in 2050, he is going to be the exact same age I am now. He'll be 42. And you never know, hopefully he'll have a son or a daughter that is the age he is now. And it got me thinking, what kind of Scotland do I want to have for him as a relatively young parent and for any future grandson or granddaughter? And the question, the big choice we face is, do we want that Scotland 2050 when my son Adam is 42 and when his son or daughter is 17, do you want it to be a Scotland that is having the same arguments, the same debates and the same discussions we're having now, obsessed about constitutional fighting, obsessed about what Scotland can't do, or do we want a Scotland that is thriving, successful and prosperous? And then it got me thinking about, what does that thriving, prosperous, fairer, greener Scotland mean in actual practice? Because it's something that politicians say all the time, but actually are just abstract concepts that actually don't mean anything in any practical term to any citizen across the country. So what do you meaningfully mean by that kind of more prosperous and fairer Scotland? What does it mean for the kind of skilled system we have in 2050 that guarantees every young person can have a chance and an opportunity? How do we have a skilled system that doesn't treat our university as the premiership and everything else somehow as just an afterthought? How do you have a skilled system that meets the needs of the ever-changing economy and an ever-changing private sector, where my parents' generation were predicted to, or did work, on average 3 or 4 jobs in their life, and this generation is predicted to work 6 or 7 jobs in their lives, but actually the next generation is predicted to work 12 to 14 jobs in their life. What does that mean for skills development? What does that mean for lifelong learning? What does it mean for the challenges faced by employers and how they get the skills supply chain they need? What does it mean for our health service? What does it mean for an NHS where we're not just having an argument about whether you can get a GP appointment or not, or how long it takes for the ambulance to turn up when you call it, for you to go to A&E, or how long the waiting lists are, but actually how do you have a national health service that helps to support good health, not just treat ill health like we have just now? So what's the fundamental reforms of our national health service? What does it mean for our housing market, where we have a housing emergency today, where right now as we speak at this conference there are 10,000 children homeless without a home to call their own in temporary accommodation? What does it mean for our housing market? How are we going to get the large-scale, all-tenure house building we need to meet the challenges of not just our social policy, but also the economic needs that come from quality housing right across the board? So what does it mean for our public sector delivery? What does it mean for our NHS? What does it mean for our broader economy? But also, what does it mean for the different parts of Scotland? So how do we think about regional economic development so every community has a chance to thrive in Scotland, rather than us having the usual argument and discussion that treats Scotland as some kind of homogenous unit, as if actually the challenge facing a family or a community in Edinburgh is somehow the same challenge facing a family that are living in the Western Isles, the Highlands, or indeed in Dumfries and Galloway. That's the big choice, is what do we choose now on the pathway we take for the kind of Scotland we have in 2050? Do we carry on with the way we have over the last 2 decades, where we don't use our maximum levers, our economic levers, our powers here in Scotland, and instead use it as a shield to fight a different argument about what's happening across the UK? Or do we maximise delivery using the powers of our Parliament, viewing it more than just as a vehicle of protest, and actually using power as an opportunity to change people's lives rather than an opportunity to campaign for something else because that's what you believe, rather than actually delivering for the citizens that exist and live in our country? That's the choice. The choice we'll face next year is, do we go down the road where we carry on the managed decline, where we talk about reform but in the context of someone holding us back, or do we use all the levers at our disposal to change Scotland for the better and make it fit for future generations? That's ultimately the challenge and the choice we face. And a more interesting angle in terms of where the political debate comes in, I actually think the big challenge facing Scotland right now, indeed the UK right now, but also the globe right now, is what kind of politics is going to win. Is it ultimately the politics of fear, blame and hopelessness, or is it a politics of let's do things differently to get positive outcomes for our children and our grandchildren? That's the big arguments, that's the big choice that I want us to lead on coming the election next year, and that's the kind of government I want to lead if we are successful next year. So how do we use the economic levers around income tax, our rate system, our planning system, our enterprise agencies, regional economic development, transport, skills, to make sure we're maximising the investments coming into Scotland, the jobs that exist in Scotland, and the exports out of Scotland? How do we use the vast powers that we have around our health and education system to make sure we have a reformed National Health Service that is embracing the digital age rather than still living in analogue times? And how do we match a skill system to meet that need alongside it too? That's the big choice, that's the big frame, and that will be the basis of how we will run that election next year, and again, as I say, the kind of government we have next year too. Because if I'm being blunt about it, tinkering around the edges is not going to work. Having an election of the auction is not going to work, where one political party will offer you 1,000 nurses, another one will offer you 1,100 nurses, or one political party will offer you 1,000 police officers, another one will say 1,100 police officers. That is not going to fix the challenges facing our country right now, and it's not going to build the kind of Scotland we need for our children and our grandchildren. Instead, we need to see what kind of skill system do we need so we can have that parity of esteem, not just for the 40% of kids that go to university, but for that child that might go straight to employment, or to college, or to university, or a hybrid of all three. That's the kind of approach we need to take, and that's the kind of debate I look forward to having with all of you in the conversation we have today, but also the debate we'll have with the public as we head towards the election next year. That's the choice. A fundamental change of direction in Scotland, where we use our powers to maximum effect to deliver for Scotland, or we go on with the same old arguments and we waste a generation. That's not a risk I'm willing to take for my kids' future or my grandchildren's future, and I'm sure it's not a risk you want to take. Thank you.
Well, again, in the sort of a brief time that we have today, I don't want to ask a question of Anas, because like Mr. Swinney, I have interviewed Anas many, many times. So I'm more keen to hear from people in the audience, and just as we did with Mr. Swinney, if we could take 2 questions rather than contributions, and hopefully from people who haven't spoken in the morning session. Is there anybody? Yeah, let's go down the front here. Yeah, so this chap here and the lady in the 4th row over there. So we'll take 2 questions for Anas.
Thanks very much. Hope you can hear me. Yes, I enjoyed reading your father's book when you were involved in the Punjab. It was fantastic. But your mother came out very strong. I'd quite like to book her for defence, fighting off a problem. Right, oh yeah,
my mother is definitely more fierce than my father, so you've got the right balance there.
I didn't doubt it. I saw you coming out of Eglinton Street Sunday with Jackie Bailey after the fine win in Hamilton. Yeah. Right, finally, let's move on. Oh yeah, I was having a meal on Saturday night in the Pakistani street food place just near the Transport Museum with a friend of mine, Saf, and he said that you haven't mentioned Gaza recently. What's your views on Gaza?
Okay, and let's take a question from the woman in the fourth row. Yeah.
Hello, a really straightforward question. You mentioned all the levers that we have at our schools at the moment, or the Scottish Government has. What would you do with the income tax to change things?
Great question. I'll start with that one first, if that's okay. I think our tax levels are too high in Scotland, and I think we have to work towards reducing the tax burden in Scotland. And the best way of doing that is, I don't think we can commit straight away on day one that come what may there will be tax cuts in the first budget, because obviously that will have other impacts in terms of public spending. But I do think we have to set out more clearly a pathway of the level of growth we want to try and achieve by working in partnership with business, and what the quid pro quo will be in terms of bringing down the tax burden for working people in Scotland. Because I think the challenge we have right now is that we are using income tax as a substitute for economic growth. And any government that gets independent advice that says 90% of what they claim they're going to raise from a tax rise will be lost in behavioural change, and in actual fact it looks like the evidence will show they actually made a net loss rather than any kind of gain from those tax changes, isn't serious about doing tax policy properly and used it as a political stunt, to be honest. So I think we do have to find a way of reducing the tax burden, but that will require genuine partnership and getting growth into our economy. And then the other levers, we have to use them to maximum effect as well. Take one example of planning, an issue that I'm absolutely obsessed about. We have an archaic planning system that detracts investment from coming to Scotland. And again, I'll give you a practical example. My home city of Glasgow, the average wait for a planning application is 58 weeks. In Manchester, it's 18 weeks. If you're a developer looking to make an investment, are you going to go somewhere where you will get a consistent answer and you'll get it faster? Or are you going to invest your money somewhere where it's going to be not sure what the answer is going to be, and it's going to be a long, protracted process? So we have to create that national planning agency that fast tracks projects that are identified as drivers in economic growth, and we do have to work towards reducing the tax burden here in Scotland, because it is a barrier of attracting talent and people to headquarter here in Scotland. And on the really important question of Gaza, I can assure you I'm not quiet on these issues, because yes, we have to care about humanity at home, but actually we also have to care about humanity across the globe. And the reality is what's happening in Gaza, also the West Bank, is utterly reprehensible, where we have the continued illegal occupation of the West Bank, you have the continued illegal siege of Gaza, you have the most basic of supplies not going into Gaza, which means the mass starvation of a population, and we will all be struck by the horrific scenes of young children in particular who are showing signs of malnourishment and starvation. And we have the continued holding of hostages that were taken in the horrific attacks of October the 7th. And the route out of all of this has to be a negotiated settlement rather than violence. Violence is not going to be the answer. And that means an end of the illegal occupation, an end of the illegal blockade, free movement of humanitarian materials into Gaza, the immediate release of hostages, and a genuine pathway to a two-state solution, which requires good faith actors on all sides. And my fear is right now we have bad faith actors on all sides. That's the only way that we're going to see any meaningful progress. And it's also important that we respect the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, because I think the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu are a flagrant abuse of international humanitarian law. I think he fails his neighbours, but also I think crucially he's failing the Israeli people.
And just come back to the the lady's point about tax. Now, I get your answer that the one thing politicians never like to do is to overpromise or to promise something which they can't deliver in financial terms. And going into the election, in a sense, pledging tax cuts would come with a very, very big price. But one of the policies which the Conservatives were very, very keen on, which was actually pioneered here in Scotland by the SNP government, was the issue of fiscal drag, where particularly for higher rate taxpayers who are earning over £43,500, that has been frozen for some years now, and of course in England that doesn't kick in until 50,000. So rather than pledge a cut in the basic rate, which may well be unaffordable, although we know what the direction of travel in public expenditure is because we got it from the Chancellor last week, would you be amenable to ending the policy of fiscal drag?
I think you're going to expect me to say this, Bernard, which is it's very hard to write a budget a year out from an election and almost 2 years out from when the first budget would be passed by any touchwood incoming Scottish Labour government. So I'm not going to write a budget this far out, but I accept the principle of fiscal drag and how that pushes more people into higher tax burdens, but also I think our tax rates are too high, and I think we have got the balance wrong in terms of what we judge as those that have the broadest shoulders. In Scotland, I don't think someone that earns roughly around £30,000 a year does have the broadest shoulders, so therefore can pay a higher tax rate. I think given the current challenges around the cost of living, that is obviously posing a challenge, but all of these things have to be looked at in the round so we have a more connected fiscal regime that recognises the burdens on the public sector, recognises the target for achieving economic growth, as well as wanting to bring down the tax burden.
Okay, one final question, because the conference is called Scotland 2050, so it's looking ahead to some very, very big picture questions around the sustainability of our public services now. And I'm sure most people in here tune in at First Minister's Questions every Thursday, so they see you raising points about pinch points in the health service, operations not delivered, waiting times that are too long, across a whole series of public policy areas. You hold, quite rightly, the government to account, but there is a sense at the moment that our services are creaking and groaning under the weight of demand, and a demand which is only going to grow because that is what the demographics tell us. So how do you, to 2050, bridge this enormous challenge where you not only have to fix what is going wrong now, today, but you have to put them on a sustainable footing, which means that economically you can afford what you want to do?
So I think we will have to take a short-term approach, medium-term approach, and then the long-term approach. So what I mean by that is right now you're right that the single biggest challenge facing the health service is the extent of our waiting list, where we have over 860,000 people on an NHS waiting list. That's 1 in 6 Scots on an NHS waiting list. But if you actually look at what's happening in our National Health Service, despite us having more staff than we've ever had before, despite us having more money spent in the National Health Service than ever before, we are still doing 50,000 fewer planned operations compared to pre-pandemic levels. So we haven't managed to get our NHS back to the level of performance it had even before the pandemic, never mind trying to recover from the pandemic. And you also have seen the theatre capacity in terms of how much the theatres are used fall in many of the key specialisms across the country. So why is that? Why is it that we're less productive with more staff and more money? Part of that is systemic, part of that is organisational, and that's why we have to do a couple of things. One is declare that national waiting times emergency that stops the hoarding of money in individual health boards and allows patients, if they have to, travel to other health boards to get their treatment faster, and so the money follows the patient rather than the health board. So for example, if an operation takes you 16 weeks in Glasgow, but you can get it in 8 weeks in Lothians, and you're willing to travel to go to the Lothians to get it in 8 weeks, why are you not given that option to go and get your treatment done somewhere else in the country, rather than right now 40% of the hip and knee replacements that happen in Scotland are being paid for in the private sector, which is completely unacceptable. So we have to break that model in terms of that national waiting times emergency and how we improve performance.
systems. Secondly, we have to get proper digitalisation of our National Health Service. There is a platform provider that actually is a Scottish-based company that provides for a number of trusts in NHS England, where they have managed to use technology and staff rotas in some cases to increase theatre capacity by 10%. If we increase theatre capacity by 10% in Scotland, that would be the equivalent of almost 4 or 5 new hospitals being built. So just using our NHS more effectively saves you the money that you need in terms of the capital receipts required to build that level of infrastructure. And then you have the bureaucracy challenge, where we have a population of 5.5 million people, but we have 14 territorial boards, 6 specialist boards, 30 integrated joint boards. Why do we need 50 chief executives, 50 finance directors, all these layers of bureaucracy and management? I would much rather we strip that right back and use the money on more doctors, more nurses and more treatments. That is a longer term, bold reform of the National Health Service that is well past its sell-by date, and I'm sure if Jean Freeman was still Health Secretary, it would be happening.
Okay. Well, that's I'm all in favour of people in one party saying nice things about people in another, because there's been quite a lot of consensus in the sessions that we've had this morning. I know that Tuesday's a parliamentary day. It's always a busy day, so like the First Minister, we're very grateful to you for taking time out of your busy day to share these thoughts and to answer 1 or 2 questions. No doubt in the run-up to the election next year, the scrutiny in terms of your offer will increase, and we all look forward to the debates ahead. But for the moment, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you, everybody.
Right, we've 2 more panel sessions left. You may well sort of say, well, how are the panels put together and so on. All of the parties within the Scottish Parliament who have representation did get an invite to volunteer people for the panels. So there are actually 2 parties in the Parliament, the Scottish Conservatives and the Scottish Greens, who didn't take up any invitation to be here. So if you're looking at a panel and thinking that's not very politically balanced, because someone who worked in television for a long number of years, balance and being fair to everybody was everything. So it's not that the organisers didn't try.